very excited to understand TWYN in a bit more depth, because going to vision and value and mission, I mean, we of course understand TWYN now as best we can, I say, from the sidelines. And it seems that there is some vision behind that. I mean, you're on the very precipice of what looks to be about a market that's about to explode.
Well, I think that, if we want to dive in and get people to understand best what's happening, I probably should scroll back to about 6 years ago. So 6 years ago, I came from a career which was heavily in the entertainment industry. So that at its heart is, how do we tell stories? How do we tell stories to each other as humans? And obviously, the way we tell stories has changed over time. So it started with probably, chalk drawings on cave walls, and evolved through things that we know, like theatre and cinema and radio and television and internet and streaming. All of those evolutions being driven by technology. And so the natural question to ask is, well, what's next? What will be the next evolution in how we tell stories and share information? And I was sitting there thinking about that 6 years ago. And I reached the conclusion through a series of events that happened to me that actually there was something very illogical about the way we tell stories and share information. The way we tell stories and share information to each other, like we're doing now, is we converse with each other in real time, groups of 2 or more. It's an interactive experience. And why do we do that? Well, we don't even think about why we do it. We just do it instinctively. And the reasons are because it would seem to me that you and I having agency in a conversation makes it more engaging, makes it more connecting, makes it more personal, makes it more interesting, makes it more intimate. All the things we just take for granted. But then think about the nature of the way content is delivered to us. All content is delivered to us today in a way that is not conversationally interactive. You don't watch a documentary and say, I'd just like to ask you about that, Stephen. Can you explain that to me? And I started by saying, well, why? Why is it that content is monodirectional? Aside from video gaming, why is it monodirectional? And video gaming isn't conversationally interactive. Why is it monodirectional? And the answer I came to pretty quickly was because the technology hasn't existed for it to be otherwise. And then I thought, okay, if we're in a world where you could communicate conversationally in real time with the character or characters in the content that you were consuming, where would that be beneficial? And I thought about some obvious things, like imagine you were diagnosed with leukemia and you came home and you told your family. And obviously everyone would be terribly upset and worried about it, and so what would they do? They would go out and research everything they could about leukemia. And you would probably be extremely worried, and you'd also be frustrated because you probably get to see your specialist once a month. Now imagine that the top leukemia expert in the world, of the type of leukemia that you have, imagine that that person was available to you any time of day or night, 24/7, and you could have a 2-way conversation with them. Would that be valuable to you? It would be immensely valuable to you. Now, that's a healthcare use case, and I use that because it's obvious to see what the value of that would be. And you probably wouldn't mind that you had to use your brain in that engagement because you're getting really important information out of it. And the same might apply in education, for instance. So you think about learning to speak a foreign language. At the moment, there are thousands, tens of thousands of companies that provide online or real-world interactive learning experiences. But there's a real problem with language learning. The problem with language learning is when you're not good at speaking a language, it's very embarrassing to speak to someone who is good because you think you look foolish.
Yeah, that's me.
And it's all of us. So the people who learn languages the best are the people who go and live immersively in a country where there's no choice for them. They have to look foolish. They have to go out there and actually learn the language. But most of us today learn languages at school or through Duolingo or other tools like that. And those are very good for learning vocabulary, grammar, sentence structure, but not for practicing conversation. So how can you put yourself in an environment where you can practice conversation but not feel embarrassed? If you could create a tool like that, that would be immensely powerful. And so I started to think through all of the logical applications if you could make content real-time conversationally interactive. And it struck me that it would be transformational of just about every business model in the world.
Yes.
You know, if you were the CEO of a company, you would be able to have one-to-one conversations with all your employees, with all your investors, with all your customers, with all your stakeholders. That would be very powerful. And of course, all of us have the biological boundaries of life, and the fact that there's only one of us, and the fact that our time is finite. And so when I thought about it, there was a convergence moment coming up that I thought was enormous, which is the combination of AI and other technologies allowing us to create digital versions of real people to transform the way we tell stories and share information. And I was prescient enough or obsessed enough by this idea 6 years ago to say, this is what I want to spend the rest of my life focused on.
Cool.
Even though virtually nothing existed that was like that at that point in time. And I would go and have conversations with people and they would kind of scratch their heads and go, that's a bit far out and wacky, Tim.
Sounds like Iron Man.
It's just weird.
Yeah.
And so coming from the entertainment industry, quite early on, there were two areas that I was really interested in. One was legacy. How do we tell the story of our lives for future generations? Because not only is that something that's very emotionally connecting and resonant for most of us, but it's also something that if we could pass on what we learn in life and what's valuable in life and what's powerful in life, if we could do that in a better way, then maybe that would save the world a lot of time, money, and problems from generation to generation. So I thought that was a very interesting and sort of noble cause. And it was something that I was personally passionate about. And I started off thinking about this idea from that point of view. But I realized quite quickly that although legacy is a really important area, it's a very difficult market to start with, because really you need a mass market product. And to build a mass market product, you need lots of other things that come before that. And so I thought, okay, if we're going to handcraft a product to start with, then who would be worthwhile handcrafting solutions for? And I thought, well, it's the people who are in most demand in the world. It's the people who have the most people who want to talk to them. And I thought that's the people who are the biggest in sports, music, and entertainment. Those are the people who are in the most demand in the world. And there are, in some cases, hundreds of millions of people who would like to engage with them. And of course, they all have a problem. Their time is finite, and so they can't possibly satisfy anything, even 1% of that demand for engagement. So I went and talked to about 10 of the leading talent agents in Hollywood. And I said, this is coming. AI is going to drive the ability for your client to have 100 million simultaneous but one-to-one conversations, like a FaceTime call with fans. Isn't that extraordinary? Isn't that transformational? And I thought they would all say, wow, you've brought us fire. This is incredible. And in fact, they all said the same thing to me. They said two things. They said, we're really worried about AI. Really worried about AI.
Interesting.
And we are most worried about AI for two reasons. Our job is to protect our client and their brand. And these brands, in some cases, are worth billions. And we now live in a cancel culture where it only needs one small misstep and your brand can be destroyed. So we spend most of our time keeping our client out of trouble. And that's a real human that there's only one of. Now what you want to do is you want to create digital versions of people that are powered by algorithms that no one really understands.
That don't care about lawsuits.
And how will we know that this algorithm will not generate a piece of content that doesn't offend someone? That doesn't damage my client's brand?
This is the crux of the problem, right?
So, problem number one. Problem number two, almost all of my clients are super into authenticity.
Okay.
So, many of them would love the idea of being able to scale engagement. But if it's a version of them that is a hypothetical version generated by AI, even if it's trained on lots and lots and lots of data about them, it's not them. And so clearly it is not what they have really said. It is what this algorithm has determined they might say. And many of my clients will never go for that. So they said these two things to me. This is 5 years ago, by the way. And so I took from that, they have a major issue with trust. They don't trust the way this technology is evolving. And I sat down with my co-founders and we talked about it. And our hypothesis was Silicon Valley is amazing at building these tools. It's amazing at getting the capital to build these tools. And I had a conversation quite early on with someone who was quite senior in Silicon Valley, and he said these tools are amazing, they're going to be transformational, and I said most of the people who you'd like to digitally scale for interactive conversations won't do it for these reasons. And he said to me, they just have to get over themselves. And there is the nub of the difference in attitudes, approach, ethos, whatever you call it, between the way Silicon Valley thinks and the way the talent and entertainment industry thinks. In the talent and entertainment industry, respecting authenticity, respecting intellectual property, respecting what's real is incredibly important. The technologists who are building the tools, their point of view is, if these guys don't use the tools that we build, we'll just use the tools for other people.
Do it anyway.
And the other people don't have to be real people.
Right.
We can just make them for fake people. We can just dream up new people. In fact, sorry, guys in the entertainment industry or the sports, you've had your lunch eaten. Because we're using these tools in a way that's profoundly going to change the nature of engagement with fans. We're just going to base it on non-real people. And okay, there are some limits because it's difficult to do that with sports because sports people typically have achieved sporting achievements, although, e-gaming may change that to some extent. But in music, for instance, or in film, or in television, or in social media, or whatever, you can create characters. You can create non-real people. So Silicon Valley is its view is simple, which is we've built these tools. We're going to exploit them. You, the entertainment industry, you either need to engage, or we're going to eat your lunch.
stop me here if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
But the other problem, it seems glaringly obvious with that type of attitude, that I take it was in contradiction to your attitude as well, was that the end product they're set to actually deliver defeats the point of the whole technology in the first place, in that the authenticity that the talent cares about instilling in their product to protect their identity is also what defines the quality of the product to whoever is interacting with the person they're interacting with.
You would say that maybe for my generation and maybe your generation, but what is the most important thing for Generation Z? Right? What is the most important thing?
Immediate gratification.
The world centered around them.
Oh, interesting.
So now I've made a digital version of Tom Cruise. It's not authentically Tom Cruise, but he's going to be your best friend.
Right.
You can talk to him every day.
He's going to say happy birthday.
He's going to do everything for you. And he's going to be there throughout your life journey. And the coolest actor of all time, is, every day you're going to be able to chat to him about, your life and what you're doing and your new girlfriend or whatever it is. And to me, that's utterly meaningless. It's just noise, drivel. But
spam.
If what matters to you is the world being centered around you, then maybe you don't care. And I think that's what puts us at a really important moment in human history. So 5 years ago, after I got that feedback from those agents, I thought about, well, maybe we could do something differently. Maybe rather than creating digital avatars of famous people, and rather than having content that is created by algorithms that no one completely understands, what about if we do something that would be completely intuitive from an entertainment industry perspective? We capture real content. So it's Lewis Hamilton talking about what it's like to race a Formula One car at Monaco. And actually, we build a script about the story we want to tell you, imagining that you have agency in that story. It's a bit like sitting next to Lewis Hamilton at a dinner party and him telling you about it. Imagine that we use archive footage. Imagine that we have real footage that we've captured from Lewis. So that imagine the experience you have at the end is you're told that this experience is you're going to have a conversation with Lewis about driving a Formula One car at Monaco. And all of the footage you see is real. And everything you hear is real and in context. But it's all pre-recorded.
That's not an easy technical problem to solve.
Not at all. It's neither an easy technical problem to solve, nor is it an easy content and storytelling problem to solve.
Right.
Because just like when the projection of film started in 1895, no one had ever thought about how do we make content to be projected on a screen. So you needed to start to think about, well, what would that even look like? Well, what we're doing is we're building three-dimensional content experiences.
Right.
One where you have agency in that experience. So it's like having a multi-dimensional documentary where you, by speaking, can drive the direction that documentary takes and the level of detail you go into. So imagine that the documentary is like the trunk of a tree. The branches are like branches coming off the tree. You drive the degree to which you go down the branches. Lewis takes you back to the trunk always as you go through the journey of the story.
Yeah.
Very complicated.
So this is, because we talk about, you mentioned gamification. And of course they do it quite well, better than the other media types. Yeah. And we've marveled before at the technicalities that must go behind some storytelling games where you can interact, and I'm not a big game, but you can interact differently with the storyline, and depending on how you interact, the results are different. But of course, crucially, the difference being from that format to the format we're discussing now is that the characters in that storyline are made up.
Correct.
They're imaginary.
Whereas these are real.
And
real stories.
Can I ask, so you spoke about reaching out to the agents, and then obviously they poured cold water on that.
Yeah.
And you then pivoted to go down this route
Yeah.
of using archived footage.
Oh, well, real new content that we film together with archive footage.
Okay, so had they said yes from the off on this side, how different would the approach have been?
Well, that's obviously a totally hypothetical question.
Yeah.
And I have no idea as to the answer of that, because on the journey, we may well have concluded for other reasons that we didn't like the idea of generative content. It may have been, that there were other considerations to take into account. And obviously, our approach is not that the world is static. Our approach is to get many of the top talent in the world to digitally scale themselves for interactive conversation. You need trust as the number one step. Once you establish trust, you can take people on a journey. And it may well be that that journey is an evolutionary one, where at the start they are very anti the idea of generative content and generative imagery. But over time, they may soften. They may change their view. They may say, Tim, I love what you do, but why don't we use the authentic footage for either real moments in history that we want to show, or for the most important elements of the message that we're communicating, and maybe we use generative footage for stuff like small talk. Right? It may be that over time that happens. Luckily, I don't even have to think about when and how that happens, because my focus is, how can I build a trusted brand? I want to be the place that talent and their management can say, I want to tell my story. I want to tell it in a new way. I want to engage with fans in a way that's never been possible before, but I only want it to be authentically me and risk-free.
Yeah, I think coming back to authenticity, I actually found the response that you received initially to be quite confusing, because most celebrities, let's say actors, for example, actors play characters, and the chances are the audience fall in love with the character and not necessarily the actor. So I'm sure there's lots of kids out there who would rather speak to Jack Sparrow than they would to speak with Johnny Depp. And so Jack Sparrow is manufactured, something quite containable. And to me, it seems that is the perfect scope to fit within the TWYN app, as opposed to the whole nuanced human being of Johnny Depp.
Yeah, I think that's a really super interesting question, and it goes to the heart of the fact that actors are individuals, and they don't necessarily like being sort of pigeonholed by particular roles that they have played. So yes, it would be amazing to create an experience where you could talk to Russell Crowe as, Gladiator. But I don't think Russell would do that. Or I don't think he would do that at this moment in time. He'd be more likely to do it talking to you, authentically being Russell, telling you the story of how he came to be chosen for Gladiator, or working with a director on the making of Gladiator, or how he delivered that role in the Colosseum. That he would do, but I think actors often have a big problem with being typecast in one particular character.
I suppose alternatively, though, you have actors go on talk shows. So let's say Russell Crowe goes on Jimmy Kimmel to talk about Gladiator.
Yes.
There are still parameters that have been created by himself, protecting his personal side. He's not talking necessarily about aspects of his family. He has PR teams. Again, I'm still struggling with the agency's issues with what you brought to them initially, because I don't think anybody is truly expecting celebrities to reveal a side of them that isn't already publicly available.
Well, let me turn your question around to you. Now let's imagine that we want to create a digital version of you for posterity's purpose to talk to future generations of your family. And let's imagine that there are two ways of doing that. One is a way where you authentically respond to things on camera. Over time, you build up a library of responses. They're all authentically you and can be accessed by future generations of your family in a conversational way. And let's assume that the other way is AI-generated content, which is based off your social media or your emails or your letters or whatever it is. Now, I would contend those are two very different things.
Yeah, but still all fall within the same issue of scope. So to me, it's all about scope, the parameters that you set in what you're capturing.
Yeah, I think the problem that I would have is that in one of those, the AI-generated content, I actually am going to get an algorithm, which I don't understand, using data, perhaps a colossal amount of data, analytically in a way that I don't understand, to produce outputs that actually are things that I never said.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, as a starting point, that are the most in-demand people in the world today, are not comfortable with that idea.
Which is understandable.
Yeah. So I think that was the point that
the
agents were trying to make. That essentially there's a chain of things that happen, much of which you're not in control of, and the output is something that may resemble you. It may be based, on certain types of data from you. That data is, we know, going to be limited, right? It's certainly not the totality of everything you are and everything that you do and everything that you've done and everything that you've seen. And at its heart, we don't actually understand how the algorithms work to process that data and conclude what we're actually going to use. Now, I think that allied to the risk together means that a lot of the most in-demand people in the world today are not comfortable with the idea of digitally scaling themselves that way, particularly for interactive conversation
that makes sense.
With others. That doesn't mean to say that's always going to be the case. And I could see that could dramatically change over time. I could see that the world may change. And that goes to the heart of sort of my mission in all of this. So my mission in all of this is I want us all to use the tools, these amazing tools that Silicon Valley has developed and is developing. Because there is profound good that can come from these tools. But I want to use them to amplify real human voices. I don't want them to be used to create a world of fakery.
Yeah.
And the problem is, when you try and distinguish between which path is going to lead to which outcome, it almost becomes quite binary. And the reason why I worry about it is, if I can use AI to generate content, I can generate a limitless amount of content. And I can serve the needs of people. Certainly people who think in a certain type of way, the Generation Z type way that I explained, where I want the world to revolve around me. So now let me create content that seems to create a world where it all revolves around you, your wants, your needs, your desires. I can create all of that for you. And in creating all of that for you, I can probably mold you and manipulate you however I wish to. And suddenly we're in this world where digital fakery has taken over. It's giving you exactly what you want with an outcome that may be entirely nefarious. And highly damaging.
Being led down a path you don't realise you're walking.
Exactly. And so I worry that we're at a really important tipping point where, Sam Altman and OpenAI, I think it was about a week or 10 days ago, they've got in trouble with Scarlett Johansson because they
wanted to use her voice.
And she said no.
From the film
and
Her,
they created a cloned version of her.
Yes.
And
they apologised, I think.
Yes, but why did they do it in the first place?
Well, they did it to, I would assume, create a buzz around the fact that...
No, but what is it about the way that they see the world which makes them think we can do it.
That it revolves around them.
Exactly. So their mission is to create ever more powerful AI tools. That's their mission. I mean, Sam is open about it. His mission is to create AGI. That is his mission. He wants to create autonomous general intelligence. Now, I'm in the Elon camp on that. I think that is fundamentally human-ending evolution. Now, maybe we end up with something better than humans. I don't know, but I'm in the pro-human camp here.
Very selfish of you.
Yeah, so extremely selfish of me.
How self-centered.
How Gen Z.
And so I worry that these guys are unchecked in their ambition. And I think they have enough money and enough political power that it's going to be very hard for anyone to stand.
And it's confusing. You know, governments aren't operating at the level that these guys are at. They don't understand it. So they're playing catch up constantly. Yeah. So it does generally go unregulated unless one of their peers from the other camp can pick it out and say, this is actually what they're trying to do.
Yeah. And so today I've been asked if I will sit on the British Standards Institute, which is the institute which looks at technical standards for things like film and television. And they work together with the International Standards Organization, the ISO, which is responsible for the same thing on a global basis, mainly US. And although these are non-legally binding standards, they're voluntary standards that people sign up to, they ultimately are the things that governments listen to in terms of primary legislation. And what is needed is primary legislation. So we need primary legislation that protects humans and human agency and content that's real and doesn't use AI. I'm not saying don't use AI. I think we should. Absolutely we should. But what I want to see us do is I want us to see it used in a way that clearly distinguishes between what is wholly created by humans, which is what is partially created by humans, and what is entirely created by AI. I think we need that distinction, and we need it now.
Yeah, especially as the AI technology at creating on its own entirely is getting so advanced. You know, I see AI generated videos, and some of them are poor.
Yes, I agree. And some of them are amazing.
And some are amazing.
Yeah.
And I think once they all become amazing, it will become impossible to tell what's what.
Totally. And that's when we need those standards.
Yeah.
We absolutely need them.
Will the likeness of a celebrity or a well-known persona, is it something that they can protect? Because you see on Snapchat, for example, or Instagram, you can often do those filters where you lay over somebody else's face. And you see nowadays impressionists who can do the voice of Tom Cruise, laying Tom Cruise's face on their own face. Yeah. And I'm always surprised because I can tell that there's no way Tom Cruise is getting a cut of them using the filter. Yeah. So from an IP perspective, if you describe it as that, are our own faces and our own voices something that belongs to us, or can these companies... I know they're going to try, but do you think they will actually be able to?
So there is primary legislation being passed in the US called the No Fakes Act, which is intended entirely for that purpose.
And is this in response to this kind of thing?
Deep fakes, I imagine this is in response to. No?
Yes. I mean, this is absolutely in response to the whole evolution of deep fakes, because it's now possible to create amazing deep fakes with amazing voice clones. Yeah. So that it's virtually impossible to tell whether it's that person who's really said something or whether that's entirely fabricated.
Totally.
And obviously, that's hugely damaging in the wrong hands. I mean, it's already being used extensively. And just imagine if the Chinese or the Russians or whoever else has an agenda is able to use that at scale. Yeah. Well, then we have no idea what's real or not.
No. And I think it really highlights the sort of gimmicky nature of the product. So if, for example, you have an AI-generated character of Tom Cruise you're speaking to, it's not recorded with Tom Cruise, and Tom Cruise has no knowledge of what's been said, then really the depth of what is there to play with is very little. You get the kind of feeling that you're talking to him, but let's compare that to an authentically created character of whomever it is. Yeah. Now suddenly the relationship with that media spans over a far greater time.
Well,
because they could hide Easter eggs. There are things that they could actually keep secret.
But there is a problem.
Okay.
Not a problem, but a limitation. So the limitation is, compared to AI-generated content, where frankly I can create endless amounts of content at the push of a button, when I create authentic content, I've either got to use real new footage that I create, which involves me taking the time of the talent that I'm working with, or I've got to use archive footage. And if I'm using archive footage, I'm probably using the archive footage to illustrate something that I want to discuss with that talent. So I've got Tiger Woods winning the Comeback Masters in 2019. What I'd love to do, as a huge Tiger Woods fan, is I'd love to talk to Tiger about that so that we together can watch the archive footage, and then I ask him questions to do with what we've watched. That means I need the archive footage, which I can pay to license in, and I need new footage from Tiger.
Yeah.
That new footage involves Tiger committing time. Time is the commodity which he has the least of. And therefore, when I create my content experiences, I need time. When the AI guys create their Tiger Woods experience, if they ever got agreement from Tiger to do it, they need Tiger's data to train the model, but they don't, and they need maybe a couple of minutes of Tiger on film to create the digital version, the deep fake version of Tiger. They don't need anything else from Tiger. So it's much easier to do the deep fake AI generated content version. It's much harder to do what I do.
Oh, so very important really that the legislation catches up with the marketplace, because it shouldn't happen necessarily that way. I don't think Tiger wants it. The actual people who are fans of Tiger don't want that. And
well, you say that.
Well,
and
okay, the Gen Z you're going to say again.
And I would agree, for the majority of us today, we would say authenticity is very important to us. I'm deeply concerned that it won't remain that way.
It's going to become self-gratification.
Yeah.
I think people grow out of that preference. So, I mean, I describe them as Gen Z too because they're younger than us.
Yeah.
But I do feel as we age and we become older and we have more experiences, the authenticity begins to rise to the top. You know, as with children, our imaginations run wild and we can kind of fill in the blanks. And as you get older, really you only care about relationships that are near and dear to you that really matter and make a difference. I have faith, is what I'm trying to say, in that Gen Z, whoever the youngest generation is, will eventually grow into a marketplace that wants that authenticity.
Do you think so? I mean, we don't live in Korea or Japan, right, where there are tremendous problems with loneliness. Yes. And there are an awful lot of single people. And I bet you already today that there are a lot of single people who are having, in inverted commas, relationships with digital avatars.
Yes, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, there's all sorts of marketplaces that have taken off that surprise me with regards to companionship.
Yeah.
That isn't a human figure.
Yeah.
Or is a human figure.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard in therapy, for example, that certain age groups are more comfortable speaking to chatbots than they are to real therapists.
Right.
And you can probably understand some of the drivers for that. When you're talking to a chatbot, you probably don't care about what you say, and maybe you're more honest, and maybe you feel that you're less likely to be judged. And so we can't be entirely dismissive, and certainly what I'm building is not a panacea, and it's not the best fit for all situations and all demands. So we can't just say, you know, what works in one place doesn't work in another place. But I think the point that I'm trying to make is it's the labeling that's really important. You need to know when you're talking to something that's real and human generated, and when you're talking to something that's machine generated. I think you need and deserve to know it, and I think that at least allows us to make our own judgment about what's important to us and what is not.
Yeah.
And that gives us a better chance as humans, I think, of protecting ourselves against fakery and against being,
yes,
you know, surrounded by it and it used for nefarious purposes.
when you talk about the time needed to onboard somebody like Tiger, let's use him as an example.
Yeah.
Can you give, because obviously you began the story of how this came to be with the technical challenge hadn't yet been conquered.
Yes.
And I take it that TWYN has managed to some degree to conquer that challenge now and to successfully onboard the thoughts and the persona of a person authentically. But how does that look? Does Tiger have to climb into a white box and answer?
No, not at all. No, this is
for 6 months. No. How does the brain transfer kind of look?
No, it looks like what Tiger's used to when he's being filmed. So this is an experience that a user has on their phone, on their mobile phone. Okay. There's no other technology required for it. There's no hardware required for it. So it's essentially delivered by mobile phone. And obviously most people in the world have a mobile phone. It requires, at the moment, a good Wi-Fi or mobile signal. So I think our stats show us, we've done global testing, and about 90% of users in the world have access to the Wi-Fi or mobile networks that would support what our requirements are, which are about 10 megabits per second in terms of data transfer speeds.
Right.
So what we do is we sit down with Tiger and we come up with a series of stories with Tiger that we want people to be able to have access to. And these are stories that are going to feel like you're sitting next to a tiger at a dinner party, he's telling you this story. But he's telling you in a way where you have conversational agency in that storytelling experience. Or it's like he's sitting next to you on his sofa watching some, his highlights of his Masters 2019 comeback. And so we agree with Tiger the stories, we agree scripts with Tiger. Tiger may not be the only person involved in the story. There may be others. Maybe his caddy is a part of the story. Maybe his manager is. Maybe there are other people who are key to whatever the story is. And then we sit down with Tiger and with the others, one by one, and we film them. And we film them answering questions. And we film them also saying some things that you would say naturally in conversation with people, like, do you think that? Oh, that's interesting. Oh, I hadn't thought about that.
Great. So
could you say that again?
There's more beneath the surface they can reveal about the conversation and the story themselves.
Because what we're doing is we are, like I said, creating a three-dimensional conversation. We are creating content in 3 dimensions. It's never been done before, but I believe if you scroll forward in 10 years' time, there will be a lot of content, educational, informational, documentaries, behind the scenes, technical, where you'll have conversational agency in real time. I don't think that you're going to chat to James Bond as you watch his latest film, because I'm not quite sure what purpose that would serve. You watch Bond for entertainment and that's it. I don't think that will happen. But I think there will be a lot of things that you'll watch, and if you want, you'll be able to conversationally engage. And I go back to what I said at the start, talking about healthcare. You've just been diagnosed with leukemia. What could be more powerful than having access to the person with the greatest knowledge in the world to talk to them in real time about that? Or maybe, I think there are 3,000 people a year who go to Harvard. Now imagine that the top professors at Harvard could teach people one-to-one in online courses at 1% of the cost of going to Harvard. Yeah, right. Or imagine people in Africa who are in the poorest parts of Africa could learn English by having a conversational app where they could converse with people for no cost in English.
Yeah.
I mean, thank goodness you've dedicated the rest of your life to working on it, because it's a big old problem to solve.
There's a lot to do, isn't there?
I don't want to lower the tone and be morbid, but I can't help but think, what about for those who are no longer with us?
Yeah. You mean who've already passed away?
Not necessarily who have already passed away, but perhaps So, going back to your entertainment business days, there's a film with Johnny Depp called Transcendence. Yeah. I'm not sure if you've seen it, but he's dying, and he manages to upload his brain to become a sentient, conscious computer. Yeah. Obviously, we're a few steps away from that. Yeah. But there does seem to me to be sort of that possibility of someone who, like when it comes to writing your will, perhaps you sit down and you spend some time and do this, and then grandkids, great grandkids, or when your child is feeling lonely and they miss you and they want to hear your voice again. It seems to me that could be a really useful tool.
So that was where we started, or that was where my thinking started. It started with the whole idea of legacy, because I've got a fascinating family story. I come from Jamaica. My family is 7th generation. I'm 7th generation Jamaican on my father's side. So there's an amazing history there. And I would love nothing more than to speak to previous generations of my family. But obviously I can't. There's very little history that still exists about it. The nature of the way that we engage with history is changing. People are less likely probably to read in the future going forward, or audiovisual experiences are more likely to be more important. So that was absolutely where I started. The conclusion that we reached about legacy actually is that it falls under what we call user-generated content. And all of us 3 founders in the business have a passion ultimately to use this platform to enable user-generated content. So what we're doing in entertainment, sports and music is something that makes total sense as the first market to build this out in.
Yeah.
But it's not actually ultimately where we really want to or are most passionate about going. And if you think about user-generated content, don't just think about legacy. Think about some other use cases as well. Think about dating. Think about how broken the nature of online dating is. And think about how a tool like this could actually firstly be a filter, so that people actually have to go through a process of answering a certain number of questions to meet the threshold that you want to have people on your dating platform. Secondly, you then actually could have a real conversation with people before you go on a date with them. And thirdly, you could probably build an algorithm so that your twin could speak to millions of other twins without you even being involved, to sort of narrow down and
that's
filter
very
down.
interesting.
Absolutely, no, that's dating. Now think about community building. I've now been diagnosed with leukemia. My dad's been diagnosed with leukemia. I would like to speak to anyone else who lives in England who has had a member of their family who's been diagnosed with this type of leukemia.
Right.
And you could have that community there. And you could have people that you speak to without needing them at all. Now think about, as we get older, being able to talk to a younger version of yourself. Now imagine that as you age, your memory starts to degrade. Maybe you end up getting dementia or Alzheimer's. What impact would it have on your cognitive decline to actually be reminded of things in your earlier life by being able to speak to a younger version of yourself?
That would be very interesting.
That would be a fascinating piece of research, right? So, and then there's social media. Social media today is entirely one-directional. You post things on Instagram, other people engage with it maybe by looking at it. Very rarely they make a comment, but it's mainly a one-directional exercise. Now imagine that social media could be 3-dimensional. You could actually talk to the character about the experiences that they were having. So as you start to think through all of these things, you could see how profoundly you can reshape the way the world works. But there are lots of questions to ask about it. So what's the balance between authenticity and the use of the tools that are being created by Silicon Valley? What's the right balance between the two when it comes to you, me, and everyone on the planet? Where's the dice going to come out there? And clearly you have to make the process really easy for people. Clearly you have to make it incredibly cheap, preferably free. Clearly you'd want something that people want to use all the time. So how do you make these experiences more like engaging in stories rather than just sort of bits of facts? And so these are all things that we're thinking about as we're building our very handcrafted experiences now. But we've got to work out how to take what is a very handcrafted process that we're using for some of the world's most in-demand people and turn that into something that could be cranked out every minute of every day for everyone in the world.
Yes.
And that's not a straightforward thing to do.
That's some undertaking.
Yeah.
And that seems to me to be before you even consider the data coming back the other way, which is that when, Messi or Tiger starts engaging with their fans as themselves, and every single fan says, "Oh, where did you get that red polo shirt you're wearing in the Grand Slam in 2019?
Yeah.
You want to find out that kind of information.
Well, the data could be the richest part of this, and we've spent very little time thinking about the data yet, beyond recognizing that actually these engagements are going to give us a type of data that's never existed before. Right. Mass scale, one-to-one engagement data about everything to do with that talent.
Totally.
That could be potentially
that's huge.
Incredibly rich.
And if you're building on the block of authenticity from the creator's perspective, then the data is more trustworthy because they're not talking to some gimmick. Exactly. So if I'm talking to somebody I believe to be, and the thoughts and the feelings and the opinions of, then I express myself honestly as my authentic self. Exactly. Which is why when I talk to ChatGPT as a text box, I'm nothing like my persona. Yeah, you don't I'm a please and thank you kind of guy.
Yeah. You say please
and I still do say please and thank you. Okay, I haven't escaped.
But I remember speaking to, on character AI. I don't know if you've tried it yet, but Character AI is a Silicon Valley company that's, I think it's raised about $200 million at over $1 billion valuation. It's absolutely crazy. And the idea is that you can have chatbot conversations with famous people, although they very clearly label it and say, these famous people are not these famous people.
Right.
So you're having a conversation with an AI-generated chatbot that is going to give you some sort of semblance of what it would be like to have a conversation.
Yeah. And I think that I assume that might be something that you've had to bat off. That to me seems like a fear that would be attributed to TWYN. Is that people think that they're not speaking to the real deal, they're speaking to some strange caricature of it.
You've actually hit the nail on the head. The biggest challenge we have in terms of communicating with users, what we are, is that everyone's starting hypothesis is this is AI generated content. Everyone. And you can put as many notices on screens going into the experience as you want. I mean, we actually have videos that pop up when you go into our apps that tell you, this is the person who's really being filmed, who's going to be talking to you. It's just being filmed in advance. And we have testers over and over again, and we ask them, what do you think you've just watched? And 90% of them say AI-generated content, and 10% of them say, well, I just had a real FaceTime call with, whoever.
Okay. Well, what can you do about that? That's a tricky message to...
It's just a war of attrition, though, right? The longer you stick around...
And it's the legislation as well, because at the moment the market is saturated with, they're not illegal yet, but similar kind of offerings which are fake.
Yeah.
And so they're used to that.
I think it's also, I speak to many of the smartest people in the world, who make investments in some of the fastest growing companies in the world. And I think we're all kind of programmed by the news flow that we get around us. And so everything about AI, when it comes to content generation, is AI is used to generate content. And so the default position in people's mind when they see anything to do with this is it's simply AI-generated content. And actually getting people to think out of the box, even if you tell them exactly what it is just hard. It's just extremely hard. So I think part of the way that you do it is you have to get the talent, your partner in this, to keep telling people what it is, because they get listened to more than anything else. And then it's just a journey of educating people. As you say, it's attritional.
I think the endorsement from those who are on the platform, whoever they may be, whichever celebrity, whichever sports star, I think you don't need me to tell you, but it seems absolutely right to start with the well-known individuals. so that you can then transition to that legacy use. Because once people truly understand the concept, if they really believe that they've just had a chat with Lionel Messi, then they'll feel more inclined to leave a legacy for their child.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. I mean, I've seen heartbreaking situations where if we could have brought TWYN to them, I know it would have had a major impact. You know, I had a friend who died from cancer in her 40s. You know, she was diagnosed, given a few months to live. She had 3 children who were like 2, 4, and 7.
Right.
You know, who
Never
barely
get to know
would have
her as
known
an
her. And if we'd been able to make a TWYN for her, just think how important that could have been.
How long does it take to make a TWYN for someone?
That's a good question, and something that I talk to my team a lot about. So if someone mega famous came along tomorrow and said, I've got a big event happening and I would love to do TWYN, and I'd love the TWYN to be a companion piece to that event, and you know, the event is in X number of days, and we decided let's throw all of our resources at doing it, how long would it take? And the answer today is about a week.
Wow.
So from the day of shooting through to getting the TWYN live on a mobile app that would be available on any phone in the world, about a week. And my question to my team is, how do we take it from a week to a day to an hour? Because ultimately, when you can do it in an hour, then Chris Martin can be about to go on stage and he can share some stuff, maybe that we've agreed with him, an hour before he goes on stage. And then when he goes on stage, you can actually talk to him.
I mean, a week's still good, so go easy on them, Tim.
A week is
I'm going to say a year.
So when we first did a prototype of me, and that was going back about 4 years ago, and that took us about 6 months to do. And then we did a prototype of Darren Brown, the illusionist, by the way, who was brilliant.
cool.
And Darren's a stakeholder in our company, and he's a fantastic guy. And if anyone has never seen a Darren Brown show, I mean, I don't think he's doing any more live shows ever again, which is tragic because...
Yeah, I remember him doing the lottery one where he predicted the lottery, and I thought, God, I wish I was him right now.
I mean, he's just a super genius. And a really, really lovely guy. And we worked with him, and it probably took us about 3 months to build a TWYN with him. And he was phenomenal. And so over time, we've managed to compress the processes involved in doing it. And I think all of the tools exist that will make it feasible to do ultimately in hours. Whether it's an hour, I don't know. Probably if it's small enough, then it could be an hour.
And on a recurring basis, they can input new information, I'm assuming, that actually goes into their own private data set. So if they did it once a year, let's say, or once every so often, then it all aggregates into the same.
So ultimately, it would work so that essentially wherever they are, they could just film themselves, and that data could then be added to whatever the story that it's intended for.
Because there'll be, new life events. You know, Tiger has to come back and maybe do another Masters, and then that'll be what people want to talk about.
So, I as a sports fan, I'm a huge sports fan, and as a sports fan, I love the idea that there's a library of great sporting moments. If you're a sports fan, there's so many great sporting moments that we've experienced. And, as a Tiger fan, I've watched probably every televised shot of every one of his 15 major championships. And I've watched all the Tiger documentaries, and I've read all of the biographies about him. But what I've never been able to do is watch the highlights of those greatest tournaments and talk to Tiger at that moment as if he's sitting on my sofa next to me, so that he can tell me the story in his own words of what it was like, and why did he choose to hit 3-iron on number 15 at Augusta, and what was the wind condition there, and what was he thinking about, and did he hear the roars from number 12, and And that hasn't ever been possible before. And
it's an interesting concept from a sort of a memoir point of view, because, you know, if I'm Tiger Woods and I'm hearing you talk about me in that way, I'm thinking, I should talk about this, and I should, you know, these live questions that might just pop into your head whilst he's sat on the sofa next to you is the basis for his memoir.
Yeah. But if you go back to what I originally talked about, the way we tell stories and share information has constantly changed. We don't sit there and think about the grand sweep of how it's changed much, but it has constantly changed. So we would be idiotic to sit there and think it's not going to change again. And so the question then is, well, how does it change? Now, there'll be plenty of people who come here and say, the next big thing's going to be VR. The next big thing's going to be AR. The next big thing's going to be 3D. Well, kind of the 3D thing didn't happen, as we know. And the problem with AR and VR is you need hardware.
Yeah.
And gamers may love it, but is it going to get mass adoption? So my thought process was, what's the thing that everyone already has? They all have mobile phones. So whatever we build, we should focus on delivering on mobile phones. And by the way, you know, people aren't very good at bandwidth anymore and concentrating. So whatever we deliver to people should be snackable, consumable in sort of short quantities. So all of those things have gone into our thinking about how we deliver this. Now we're at the point where, you know, part of what's left for us is we've got to take something that is a very handcrafted process and work out how we scale that. And we haven't done that yet. You know, that's the next thing. And then part of it will be, well, what does the evolution look like? When do we, you know, today you can create films, as you rightly said, that in some cases look perfect. So that means that actually maybe I don't need to film Tiger at all. Maybe the script is entirely written, approved by Tiger, and actually it's Tiger, you know, the film of Tiger saying those things is generated by AI.
Yeah.
Now, that's made him happy because he knows everything that he said is authentic. He knows that there's no risk of going, you know, off topic or, you know, creating reputational harm. He's got to get comfortable with the fact that he hasn't been filmed. This is actually created. Now, for some talent, they'll be fine with that. They'll be fine with it now. For others, they won't be fine with it. Some talent will say, I'm an artist. I hate AI.
Yeah.
I'm just not going to do it if it's AI. You know, AI is getting, you know, causing people in my industry to lose their jobs. I hate it because of that. So my idea is, can we build the place that builds the bridge between Silicon Valley and the entertainment industry?
Yeah.
That's really what we're trying to do. Build the bridge so these tools can be used to have a lasting benefit on all of us, so that actually we can authentically have access to the people with the most important information in our society.
It's a noble mission, actually.
It is a mission.
It's a mission.
I can't say whether it's noble or not, but
I think it's noble.
My mission.
Yeah,
yeah,
no.
I think it's actually quite important.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the right word. For the sake of quite a lot of things, mostly passing down real experience, real knowledge, real opinions. It opens up a huge area for...
You're just thinking about dating, aren't you?
Yeah.
And how much time and effort that gets off.
Yeah.
It would have really helped me in my younger 20s, you know. Yeah. No, in fact, actually, I find it overwhelming to consider the possibilities and the kind of areas that would be set to benefit from the technology. And I think it's pretty cool to have fixed it. If somebody wants to experience a TWYN experience today, they download the TWYN app, do they?
So the best thing to do is we have a beta that we can share with people that they can use. I can send you so that you can share it with anyone who wants to access it. And
We'll
that's open to anyone to be able to use it. It's limited in terms of content, and it's it's just an internal group of people here, because obviously we don't want to be using talent for those purposes. Yep. But it's a pretty cool experience and fun to have a go with.
So what are the next steps from coming out of beta into where we're, gold standard?
So the next step is we are due to launch in the next 12 weeks globally, commercially, with our first partner, which is Lionel Messi. So obviously someone who's in quite a lot of demand around the world. He has 503 million followers on Instagram. And so the plan is, as part of a bigger project that he's promoting, which are football boots as memorabilia, which are made with recycled plastics from the ocean. People who buy those boots will get access to TWYN content that will be available on a Messi app, and it will also be available for subscription by those people who don't buy the boots, with pricing that's likely very, very low. We haven't set the final pricing, but we're talking about most of the low-income world being maybe $1.99 a year for access to all content.
Cool, that's great.
And the idea is that there will be a variety of Leo stories, experiences that will be available on that, and we'll hope to continue building those experiences. He has some partners that he's expecting to work with on the football boot project, that may also end up being part of that Messi app world. So it'll be something which will be completely unique, completely novel. People will never have seen anything like that before. We think that will then be a catalyst to get a number of other very significant talent on there. There's one person who obviously is often spoken of in the same breath as
yes,
Messi.
That's when I'll be downloading the app.
And we're in conversation with his team about this, and then there are others in sports, music, and entertainment that we've had conversations with, and we think they'd be very keen to follow on after we've shown what's possible with Messi.
Incredible.
Really clever to come down through the personality themselves at this time in the market to qualify it as being genuine and authentic. I think that's a really clever idea, and makes it so much more valuable. The $1.99 a year, that pricing is very low. Out of interest, is that decision intentional to give the marketplace free access?
We want to get as many users as possible. I mean, if we had a more developed commercial strategy, we might make it completely free. So, you might have an advertising strategy or a sponsor-backed strategy or something like that. But at the start, we'll make it very low pricing because we want as many users.
Yeah, and nice for the personalities too, because there's no sort of barriers in their own fan base, which is, I don't think any artist likes that. And you see a lot of artists complain about the price of their own gig tickets. Yeah. And, great.
I can't let you leave until we talk about your work in the entertainment industry.
Yeah.
I'm a bit of a film geek. And it's going to seem disjointed now because it should have really come first, but I was a bit mesmerised with all the AI chat.
No problem with
I need to just pick your brain about this and correct me if any of these stats are wrong.
Yeah.
But in your 14 years in the industry between 2000 and 2014, you structured over 300 deals to finance, acquire, produce and distribute over 600 movies.
Yes.
And some of those movies include Pirates of the Caribbean 2 and 3,
Yes.
Iron Man 2,
Yes.
Jurassic World,
Yes.
and The Bourne Ultimatum.
Yes. All true.
Why did you leave that industry?
You had it done, made. Could have sailed into the distance.
Well, I ended up in the film industry entirely by chance, completely by chance. So I knew nothing about film. There were tax breaks that were introduced by the British government to encourage British films in 1997. So the British government introduced, Tony Blair's government introduced very attractive tax breaks, both for small films and big films. And I happened to be working in a tax-structured finance boutique at the time. And we were selling another product, and the government's announcement came along. On the same day, the government passed other legislation that killed the other product that we were selling. And so I
big quick pivot.
Sat down with my boss at the time and said, what do you think? And he said, these are really attractive tax breaks the government's introduced here. We should create an investment structure. And as I said, I knew nothing about tax. I knew nothing about film. I knew a few people involved in the industry, and I thought they were all mad. I thought it was a sort of industry that, you know, non-serious people were involved in.
But there's a lot of big money in the industry. And
what I didn't understand then, but I very quickly understood, was if you tell people that paying tax is optional, and instead of paying tax, what they could do is use their tax to invest in films, then there's an awful lot of people who are interested in investing in films. And that's essentially what the government's legislation did. That was the result of it. And I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. The guy who was my boss said, look, I'm selling my structured tax boutique. I think this film stuff looks really interesting. Go away and set up a company. I'll provide the initial seed funding. And then he came to me a little bit later and he said, I've sold my company, but I can't join you because I'm fighting some legal action elsewhere. He said, if you ever close a deal, just pay me a 1% royalty. Closed the first deal, a second deal, a third deal, paid him his royalty. Then he said, you know, I just need a bit of money. Give me £250,000. I'm gone from your hair forever. And I did. And as a result, I ended up in a position with this business which was at the forefront of this entirely new industry, which ended up financing 600 films, 300 partnerships, $10 billion worth of film, including all the ones that you mentioned. The question as to, and you know, obviously many incredible stories and great times, and learned an awful lot about the entertainment business, which is, you know, far too much to talk about here. But why I left was simply because investing in the film industry needed the tax breaks, and the government eventually took away the tax breaks. I did actually, with 3 other partners, create a non-tax-driven fund in 2006 called Aramid. And Aramid raised about $330 million in about 18 months from institutional investors and private investors to invest in the entertainment industry without tax breaks. And unfortunately, the timing of that was very poor because we obviously had the financial crisis in 2008, which absolutely killed the value of film entertainment rights between about 2008 and 2011. And so ultimately that fund was wound down. And, you know, we carried on creating film structures probably until about 2011, 2012. But by then, it was the aftermath of the financial crisis. There was obviously a large budget deficit. Government was delivering a policy of austerity. It was starting to move into the phase that anyone who had paid less tax than they otherwise might have been was sort of morally doing the wrong thing. They started to go after high-profile people and companies that were paying lower tax than they could have otherwise done. And so it was just an environment which that sort of financing was no longer feasible in. So we stopped doing that and moved to other things.
Would you say that experience in the entertainment industry prompted TWYN in any way?
I think certainly things that I learned during that period have been very important in shaping my thoughts about the way we move with TWYN. I'm not sure that they prompted my thinking about TWYN. TWYN was more prompted, I think, by 2 things. One was, if you've ever been to the Holocaust Museum in Chicago, there was an experience which was funded by the Shoah Foundation, which were called the Holocaust holograms. And what they had done was they'd taken survivors of the Holocaust and they'd asked them loads and loads of questions and then created them as holograms, and you could go and talk to them, asking them questions about the Holocaust. And that, together with a Radio 4 program that I listened to called Unforgettable, which involved people who were alive being able to, in inverted commas, talk with previous radio footage from their deceased relatives. Those two sets of experiences showed me the emotional connectivity that being able to converse with someone you felt you had an important connection with was incredibly powerful. So that was very shaping to me. And then I was involved in a business called Dinosaurs in the Wild, which was an immersive experience that was intended to make you feel like you'd sort of gone back in time to Jurassic World. And we used both 3D and VR and AR in that. And some of the experiences that I had when we were testing those technologies, together with some of the stuff that I saw being done with holograms, all of those helped me in my process of thinking about how we tell stories and share information changes over time. So these things don't come out of a vacuum. They come out of experiences that you have that shape you.
Yeah, I just thought it was interesting because of the way that you use the phrase storytelling.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because you've essentially been involved in storytelling for 20 years, just through different mediums, and this is the latest.
Yeah, I think that's totally true.
And it might even go full circle.
Yeah.
You might see films in the future using interactive aspects. If you're watching a film in VR, for example, then I think it's perfectly feasible that the format of a film may change and the plot could be different.
Yeah, I mean, I think of VR and AR and holograms as delivery mechanisms, really, and then 3D. I don't think about them as formats. Whereas I think interactive conversational content is a new format. And I think what's interesting is when you don't think about delivery mechanisms, when you think about formats tend to be much more long-lasting, profound changes.
And as you say, those other delivery mechanisms have no interaction.
Yeah, correct. Not per se. Which is why when everyone got very excited about the metaverse, about 2 or 3 years ago, everyone said this is the future. And I kept saying, I don't get why it's the future, because if I go into the metaverse to listen to Elon Musk, I can't have a conversation with him. It's still a monodirectional experience. Physically, I might feel I'm in the same room with 100,000 other people listening to Elon.
But
why is that interesting to me?
You also have to own a headset and all these kinds of things.
Yeah.
So really, it's just a glorified way of going on YouTube.
But what I've understood from trying to build something from scratch, and obviously it's not my first rodeo, but what I've understood here is that, in essence, what I'm doing and what anyone does when they do this is they're doing something that's counterintuitive. So they're going against the flow. The flow is AI generates content. That's the way everyone's brain thinks. That's the flow. It would be incredibly hard to build a competitive business for me doing AI generated content, because there's so much money in Silicon Valley. There's so many people doing it already. There's so many people raising huge amounts of capital there. All the best engineers are probably there already anyway. The models are all based over there. So it would be intuitive to go do that, but it wouldn't be counterintuitive. What would be counterintuitive is to do what I'm doing.
Yeah. You seem like someone who's incredibly good at raising money.
Yeah.
Have you done that here with TWYN?
Yeah. So we've raised about $25 million so far, which, when you think we are substantially pre-revenue for a UK or European company, that is a lot of money to raise, and it has been very hard, especially the last couple of years. It's probably been the hardest time ever to raise venture funding that I can recall. And this is my 15th business that I've been a founder or co-founder of. So, it's been very hard. But, those hard yards, getting through them is what separates the people who win and the people who lose.
Couldn't agree more.
Well said. I think that's probably a good place to wrap this up, Tim. This has been eye-opening, inspiring. We were very excited to learn more, and it hasn't disappointed. It's been, I'm not envious of you because you seem to have quite a big task at hand.
I'm not envious of your team who have to get that 7 down to 1 either.
No, indeed. Yeah,
it's always easier when you have a mission. When you have a mission that you believe in, it makes it a lot.
Absolutely, and we always say a man needs a mission, and it really does define the work you do day to day from morning till dusk. So thank you very much for your time today. Thanks for meeting with us.
Great. Thanks, guys. Thanks for the good questions.
Look forward to seeing what else comes about. Good.